Welcome to Memory Video Lesson 3. So continuing, we're going to be learning about effortful processing strategies for encoding, which is getting information in. And if you recall, effortful processing is necessary to form explicit memories of the factual knowledge, personally experienced events type, and we're going to learn a number of strategies to facilitate that process. We'll start with one of my favorites, which is chunking. So we know that we can only handle in our working memory 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information. So one way to increase that is by chunking individual units into chunks of information that can be counted as 1. So for example, not that any of us actually memorize credit card numbers, but in case we wanted to, they're usually grouped into I think it's 4 sets of 4 digits. Another example of that would be your student ID. Usually students either remember it as 2 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 2. Also, phone numbers are usually chunked into 3 pieces. So just to show you how hard it would be to memorize a credit card number without chunking it, I'm going to flash across the screen 16 numbers, and I want you to have ready paper and pencil or pen, but don't write anything, and as a matter of fact, don't even pick up your pencil or pen until the screen goes blank. Otherwise you'll be cheating and you won't get to experience reality. So here we go. Look at these, and then when they disappear, write down what you remember. Now, I'm not actually going to give you enough time because honestly, none of us ever remember very many. It's too much because we haven't chunked them yet, right? So now let's chunk them into 4, I don't think it's going to be 4 sets of 4, but we're going to chunk them, okay? So we're going to group them. So the same deal, pen or pencil down until they disappear, and then you pick up, write down what you remember. Order does not matter. Okay, write down what you remember. Well, I'm not actually going to give you a whole lot of time because we don't do a heck of a lot better with this much information merely by chunking. So we've got to add another element, all right? So let's add another element. Let's add meaning. So same numbers grouped in a different way. As soon as they disappear, pick up your pencil, write down what you can remember, no particular order, and I'll give you sufficient time this time. Okay, you've probably exhausted your memory, so let's see how you did by adding meaning. Did you get, I don't know, Kentucky Fried Chicken, the FBI, Bank of America, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, CVS, Pharmacy, I like an SUV, and I'm rolling on the floor laughing. I don't play for the NBA, and I'd like a Q-tip. So I bet you guys did much better. So that is the power of adding meaning to chunking. Now, mnemonics. Okay, so I kind of messed up there. Wait. Well, let's see. The words that you just saw, and I disappeared them too quickly. Normally in class, I read them to you and then real quickly without you seeing them, and then I have you write them down. So, because I don't want to start over, because this is like my second time doing this, I'm just going to explain it to you. What I do is after you've written down what you remember, I go around and I ask each student to name some that they remembered. And then I ask everyone, did you notice a pattern? And maybe somebody figures it out, maybe somebody doesn't. So what that pattern is, the words that we tend to recall were the ones that we can visualize. For example, plane, cigar, candy, pizza, fire, pencil. This is actually a very powerful memory technique. When I went to college, starting in my late 20s, I was taking a neuroscience class and I had to memorize where all the different brain structures were and the functionality. And I learned this for a test by making a picture of a brain, a big one, writing down the name and the functionality, and then I would cover them up and I would practice recall. And I did this so many times that when I took the test, I discovered that I could close my eyes, and in my mind's eye, my visuospatial sketchpad, I could actually see what I had created and read right off of it. So that's how powerful visualization is. A mnemonic is a memory trick, and there's many mnemonics, and visualization is one. Another one is to use hierarchies and categories. So it's important to learn your information the way it's presented in a textbook, because it's presented to you in a meaningful way, in an organized way, as opposed to you just memorizing definitions in a glossary of a bunch of concepts organized by the alphabet. So remember to do it that way. It uses chunking as well as memory. So we've got chunking here, effortful processing strategies, as opposed to the other two topics under encoding and effortful processing. So, and it's also a graphic, so you could actually memorize the look of that. Here's another example, the same information organized more in a mind map presentation. Now, I've already taught you rehearsal and distributed practice, and we know that mass practice, otherwise known as cramming, although it could help you get a good grade on a test, you're going to forget everything that you learned really quickly. Better to spend the same amount of time, space it out, say over 4 days, with some sleep in between, and you're going to remember it not only for the test, but you will retain it and be able to recall it a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. So now the other one that I've taught you is retrieval practice, which is also called the testing effect, and that is having access to practice quizzes or taking lots of quizzes. And you have access to practice quizzes on Launchpad, and that's also why I tend to give you a lot of quizzes and let you take them twice, because the more opportunities you have to answer questions about your material presented in many different ways, you're actually practicing retrieving that information. Now, we talked about adding meaning when we added meaning to the chunking. And so there's 2 levels of processing. One is very shallow, like only what the letters of the alphabet look like as you're reading, you're really not going to remember any of the meaning that way. Hearing is a little better, but unless you're really focusing on the meaning or the semantics, you're not likely to remember very much at all. So always focus on what words mean, what the words mean of the concepts you're learning, as well as every word that's in a definition of what you're learning. Okay, so now here, if you were to memorize this list of words without using any mnemonics, you probably wouldn't do very well. So what kind of mnemonics can we use? We can use meaning. Now, one of the ways that I used when I tried to figure out a way to memorize these quickly was I thought of a story. And our brain loves narratives. So whenever you can learn anything in the form of a story, that's very powerful. Then we have the self-reference effect, which is when your teachers say, make it personal, that's what they're wanting you to do. They're wanting you literally to connect it to yourself, and that gives it meaning. So that is also a mnemonic. Now let's look at the neuroscience of memory. Explicit memories utilize the hippocampus in conjunction with the frontal lobes. So the one I really want you to hone in on is the hippocampus. And then implicit memory utilizes the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. So I really want you to hold on to the cerebellum. So we're going to learn a little bit more neuroscience. First of all, we don't store our memories like in one place. You know, this memory's over here in my brain. It's not isolated files, but overlapping neural networks. So whatever areas of the brain were being utilized as we were learning, say, new information or experiencing a new event in our lives, that actually is going to be the memory that gets reactivated when you recall it or retrieve it from your brain. So explicit declarative memories remember facts, stories, meaning of words, etc., etc. Encoding and storage is facilitated with the hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system, and its events and facts are held there for a couple of days before they're consolidated, which is what you do at night when you're sleeping. And without the hippocampus, you couldn't form any new explicit memories. And if yours was damaged, like mine is, you can form fewer, so it's harder. You still can, but it's harder. Now, with implicit memories, such as skills, procedures, and conditioned associations, that's going to be your cerebellum, completely separate. So you can store a phobic response even if you can't recall why it is that you have this phobic anxiety about a particular place or object. It's because you didn't need to have a memory which would be like an explanation which you could talk about, and that would have been your hippocampus. That's not necessary for these conditioned associations. Instead, it's your cerebellum. And the basal ganglia is also involved in that. Now, I think this is the end of this particular one, and the next one that I make is going to go into some more detail about some of these topics. For now, I'm going to sign off.